May 5th, 2020 meeting of the Lane County Budget Committee to order. And I think what we'll do is we'll just go ahead and move straight into the committee business section, unless anybody has any questions. If you have any questions now about the procedures or anything else before we get started.
Mr. Chair, this is Pete Sorensen. Could you just read off who's on the call?
I can do that. So there's myself, Herb Volodman, and then Larry Abel, and Chris Hazen, Dale Stoneberg, Don Leslie, Jay Bosevich, Pete Sorensen, Pat Farr, and Heather Buck. Did I miss anybody?
If you want, Mr. Chair, we do have some other staff on the call, and I see Greg Rickoff, our Director of Operations, Alana Holmes, our Human Resources. Did you want to read the other attendees? I guess I should ask that before I do that.
If you would do that, I think that's a great idea.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll read the attendees that I can see, and then for anyone we miss, if you could just call yourself out when I'm done. Chief Deputy in the Sheriff's Office, Carl Wilkerson. Our Budget Manager, Christine Moody. Our Chief Information Officer, Mike Finch. Our Director of Operations, Greg Rickoff. Our Human Resources Director, Alana Holmes. Our Assistant Director of Health and Human Services, who is our Acting Director of Health and Human Services, Kachina Inman. Our Benefits and Wellness Manager, Mary Miller. Our District Attorney, Patty Perlow. Our Talent Manager, Ryan McBride. And Sheriff Cliff Harold. Is there anyone whose name I did not call?
Mike Coles.
Dan Hurley. And Dan Hurley, Public Works.
Of course, Mike Coles is our assessor, our elected assessor. Is there anyone else? Okay.
Steve, this is Christine. We also have Jill Allen from the Budget Office and Tanya Ellis from the Budget Office on the call.
Thank you.
Excellent. And then Commissioner Farr, do you have a question?
No, I'm just going to call to get in the queue right away.
Okay, did you have a question for right now?
As soon as we start business, I have a question.
Excellent. So we'll start committee business and we'll start with questions. So Commissioner Farr, do you have a question for the committee?
Are we on 2A right now, Chair Blodeman?
I guess we are.
Then I would like to nominate her Blodeman for chair.
Thank you, Commissioner.
I'll second that.
Are there any other nominees for the chair of the Budget Committee for this year? Hearing none, I guess we'll go ahead and we will do a vote real quick. I'm not sure, what's the best way to do voting on a GoToMeeting?
Chair Buck does a really good job of handling that. Could ask her.
Voice vote.
I would
Sounds
usually do a voice vote unless it's contentious, and then you could roll call if you felt like it.
Excellent, I appreciate that. So all those in favor of electing myself, Herb Volodman, as chair of the Budget Committee for this year, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Aye, please. Okay.
Mr. Chair,
Yeah,
this is Christine. I don't believe there was a second. Sorry, I don't believe there was a second to the motion, or we missed it.
I heard Dale.
Was it, Dale?
Dale, I'm sorry, we missed it. Thank you.
Okay. So we'll move forward to electing a vice chair. Nominees? Yes, Commissioner Bosevich.
I'd like to nominate Dale Stoneberg. Can I
I'll second.
nominate Larry?
I've heard nominations for Dale and for Larry. Let's start off. Is there a second for Dale's nomination?
I second it, but if Dale nominates somebody else, I'm not sure if he wants.
Yeah. I don't.
I nominate
I'll pass
Larry
on
for
that.
this. I'll withdraw my nomination if Dale would prefer to have Larry be vice chair.
Thanks, Dad. Appreciate it, buddy.
If elected, I will not serve.
So I withdraw
Okay.
my nomination.
I'll withdraw my
Sounds good.
second.
Okay, so I believe I need a second for Larry for vice chair.
I'll second that.
Second. We all second.
Excellent.
Pick one.
Everybody seconded. All those in favor of Larry as vice chair, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, Larry, you're our vice chair. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move forward to the review of the minutes from the Budget Committee meeting for, let's see, what was the date on that? May 16th, 2019. Are there any comments or corrections for the minutes? Okay,
I'll move approval.
and who was that?
Second.
Very good. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor of accepting the minutes as read, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Passes unanimously. The minutes are approved as submitted. Okay, so we'll move forward into committee process. Ms. Moody, do you have some information for this section?
I don't have anything other than to mention that you should have received an email today with some additional materials, including your agenda for next meeting, some public comment received via email, and am I echoing or just for myself?
Oh, you're good.
Just for myself. All right. We can go over the public comment kind of briefly before that. So maybe after my presentation, we can do that before we go off for that. Just to kind of refresh we've been emailing a little bit how we handle that process, but to let the public know too. So I don't have anything other than that.
Okay, do any other committee members have any questions or comments about the committee process?
Herb, I would like to say something. This is Pete.
Yes, Pete. Go ahead, Pete.
Okay. I just wanted to ask Christine if I'm correct, if I'm understanding this correctly, that when you go to the Budget Committee's website, the Lane County Budget Committee's website, you can learn what the meeting schedule is for the committee. And I'm wondering if that is the up-to-date meeting schedule so that the public is aware of when we're meeting.
Yes. So you can go to www.lanecounty.org/budget, click on the 2021 budget process, and then Budget Committee. And then to the right, you will see links, and one of those is the Budget Committee schedule. We also post out there every piece of paper that the Budget Committee is receiving is also posted on that website so that the public can see what you're seeing.
What is the material that's handed out at the Budget Committee meetings? Where is that posted on the Lane County Budget Committee website? Under Budget Committee materials or?
Correct. Yes, and it'll be by day, so it'll appear on the day that it was handed out to you.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so far, do you have anything on that calendar? The 2021?
On the calendar or just the materials out there? Yes,
Well, no,
everything.
on the materials, I see you've got agenda of the meeting we're in now, the budget committee minutes, written comment, questions received, Q&A, shared services chart, all of that.
Correct. So Joe
So that-
Celesta
that-
was, I'm sorry.
Well, I just wanted to, there's a lot of stuff flying around normally when we're meeting, and we can't really do that now because we're not meeting the way we usually meet. So I'm just wondering if the materials are going up on the website fairly frequently.
They are, yes. So we are updating the website. We are putting information out in Dropbox, and then we are also emailing it. So depending on how you told us you want the materials, you can access it any of those three ways. And Joe Celesta was
Also, the website, see, I'm concerned about the public getting the materials.
the website is being updated as we are doing Dropbox and as we are emailing. So we're doing all three at once. We're very
Excellent.
close
Thank you.
together. Yes.
Thank you so much.
Uh-huh.
Okay, are there any other questions about the committee process? Hearing none, we will go ahead and move into section 3, which is the budget message. Mr. Mokrowski.
Thank you, Chair and members of the committee. Good evening. We get to work a lot with the 5 commissioners, and we love working with the commissioners, but it's a special treat to have the 5 resident members of the Budget Committee with us. And again, to Dawn Leslie and Chris Hazen, who are new to the committee, welcome, and look forward to working with you throughout this budget process. As we've said in the orientation, this is really this is a first for me in 20 years in local government and counties in dealing with budgets, of doing this virtually, but we'll make it work. This is, I was reflecting on the fact that this is my 6th year with Lane County. I think I started May 4th of 2014. And this will be my 6th proposed budget with the county. And so I wanted to provide just some context for everyone and show you some information and share some things that I'm sure you're familiar with, but just to paint the broader picture about before we talk about where we're at and where we're headed, how we got to where we are. When I started in Lane County in 2014, we were facing approximately a $6 million structural imbalance, both in the general fund and the road fund, due largely to a combination of a significant drop in federal funding through SRS funds and timber receipts, and significantly low property tax rate, which I'll touch on in a minute. And there was, frankly, a bit of a feeling that there wasn't much we could do, given all of the challenges that the organization faced and the amount of resources you've heard the stories about in 2012, and the big cuts in SRS that drove significant reductions in services and layoffs of employees in the organization, corrective action that had to happen in order to deal with the reality of the decline in funding. And so the organization was really continuing to sort of adjust to that new reality of those significant cuts, and contending with the fact that it really had less resources than it needed to provide the level of service. And so there was a bit of a mentality of there must not be a lot we can do, and we can't do more given the fact that we've had to cut so much. And what we've really attempted to do over the last several years is have a very clear strategic focus and financial discipline. So we've talked a lot about our strategic plan, that we're now in strategic plan 3.0, that our board last year approved our new strategic plan and added a number of things, but we wanted to make sure that first, there is a linkage between what the strategic priorities and goals of the Board of Commissioners are and how we spend taxpayer resources each year. And so we started by creating that strategic focus and trying to determine if we can't be all things to all people because we don't have not only endless resources, but we don't have enough resources to provide the level of services that our community demands and should expect. But that's our reality. Let's make sure that we focus on the things that are most important to the community. So we don't want to spread mediocrity. We want to focus on the areas that are most important and be really good at those. And then acknowledge there are going to be some other things that we can't do as well, and we're going to need some help with. So strategic focus and financial discipline has been, I think, a core tenet of our approach. And we've set for 6 years, we've had the same goal as it relates to our budget: create a structurally balanced budget without the use of reserves. That means our revenues equal our expenses and all of our funds. We're not using our savings account, i.e. our reserves, to balance the budget and fund operations. We'll build up our reserves and use those reserves in the case of an emergency that we may need them, or a one-time investment that's really critical for us. So structurally balance the budget without the use of reserves, without layoffs, and without cuts in services. That was the other goal, is to say, we've been through layoffs. We've had to make those cuts before. We don't need fewer people in this organization doing more work. We need more people in this organization. And so let's maintain the workforce we have and really invest in those folks. And then work on stabilizing and improving the services that we provide. So that's been our focus: stabilize the budget without use of reserves, without layoffs, and without cuts in services. And I want to touch on how we've done that. We've got a couple slides here. We can go to the first one on revenue. And we should have a slide here that many of you have seen. It's a little busy. On the left-hand side, this is both on the left and right, it ranks the 36 counties throughout Oregon. And if you just go to the right side of the slide first, it ranks the permanent property tax rate for the 36 counties. And you'll see Lane County is where the arrow is, the seventh one down. So the top, Josephine County, is the lowest permanent property tax rate in the state. Lane County has the seventh lowest permanent property tax rate at $1.28. And then if you go to the left-hand side of this chart, you'll see when we look at total per capita local revenue, so you take property taxes and you take transient room taxes and car rental fees and all the other revenues, all the revenues collected, local revenues collected by the 36 counties, which is more of a complete picture of revenue than just looking at a property tax rate. Lane County actually comes out as the third lowest. So third lowest total local revenue per capita of the 36 counties. Seventh lowest property tax rate, third lowest. We can go to the next slide. And we talk about, I'm actually going to jump to do we have the SRS slide? Why don't we go to that one first? So here's, and this has been updated as of the current fiscal year, but not the proposed budget. This shows you SRS funding, because this is really these two graphs, the last one on local revenue and property taxes, and then this federal funding graph put together is the perfect storm that Lane County has faced. So low property tax rate. Well, we didn't need, back in the 70s and 80s, we didn't need a higher property tax. It was okay that we were the seventh lowest property tax rate because we were receiving $40 million inflation adjusted revenue per year, more than we receive today in the road fund and the general fund. In 2 of our 32 funds, we had $40 million more. And it actually was more. If you go back, this chart goes back to 2001, 2002. If you go prior to that, their funding was actually higher. So back in the 70s and 80s and even into the 90s, the property tax rate that Lane County had, the fact that it was so low was manageable because we had all this federal funding that was supporting local services. And then what happens is federal policies change and management of federal lands changes, and that restrictions on logging occur. The federal government then does a Band-Aid with the Secure Rural Schools funding. And then you see what happens with, this is just Secure Rural Schools since 2000, 2002, an inflation adjusted 93% reduction in funding, essentially $40 million per year in the last 20 years, 40 million per year that's been wiped off our books that we once had to provide critical public safety, critical health and safety and general government services that we no longer have. And these two things converged around the same time, whereas as this funding, as the SRS funding was coming into play, and shortly before that, the decline in SRS funding, state property tax caps went into effect in the mid-90s. It froze us for where we're at today. And thankfully, we've been able, in the case of the 2013 and I believe 2017 renewal of the jail levy, which really has served as a critical Band-Aid to help support some of our most critical public safety services provided by the Sheriff's Office. Though these short-term 5-year serial levies that we've received for public safety have been really critical in patching some of those critical services, but we remain underfunded. We remain in this perfect storm of managing significant decline in resources with an artificially low property tax rate that's frozen. And so that's the environment that we've been living in. And so what we've said over the last several years is, let's get our own house in order, right? The county went out in 2013 and asked the voters to support local funding, which they approved and reapproved in 2017 for the public safety levy. And we've then, in the past 6 years, really doubled down on our expenses and said, if we can't, the community has stepped up and helped with some of our critical public safety services. Now let's also look at how we manage our expenses. And so our other focus has been managing our internal expenses, things that don't impact services, but are nonetheless impactful in terms of our ability to free up resources to invest in services for the community. So think about outstanding debt. Think about our pension costs. Think about our health insurance costs. Our approach has been, the better that we can manage those expenses. We spend $25 million a year on employee health insurance, and that cost is growing by 10 to 15% a year. That's a lot of additional money that's having to go into something that isn't adding value to the public. So how do we maintain the benefit for our employees, but manage that expense in a more proactive and disciplined way? And so we've seen over the last several years, our health insurance costs have been essentially flat, not because we've degraded the benefit, but because our employees now have skin in the game. We've invested in health and wellness and really managed that cost effectively. We'll talk more about our investment in a pension side account, which we're prepared to bring forward to the board for a final decision this summer. That is expected to reduce our ongoing pension. It's about a $10 million investment by Lane County that leverages $2.5 million from the state and is intended to reduce significantly our unfunded liability for our employee pension costs over the next several years. And debt, I mentioned, in terms of refinancing existing debt to capture lower interest rates, to prepay debt, and free up ongoing resources for services. So we can go to the last slide then, just as a breakdown. Oftentimes, and this is helpful to share with folks, that our taxpayers write their property tax bill to Lane County Assessment and Taxation, but the reality is just about 11% of the tax bill, particularly for the majority of our population that lives in an urbanized area, about 11% of that goes to Lane County. The vast majority of property tax dollars goes to school districts and cities and other public service districts like libraries, parks, water districts, and fire districts. So we try to remind this, that Lane County, we have a really low property tax rate compared to the other counties, and we're actually a really small piece of your annual property tax bill, particularly for a majority of the population. So I want to touch on this, I will just say, without burying the lead much further, because that was a long intro, that the proposed budget for next fiscal year is structurally balanced in all of our major funds, with one exception, and we'll talk about the Parks Fund in a moment. The other, we actually have 33 funds now. The other 32 funds are structurally balanced without the use of reserves, without layoffs. We have no layoffs proposed in the budget. We have no cuts in services proposed. We have a number of investments in some critical strategic areas that the board has identified, and we'll walk through those briefly. So this has been about, our approach again has been about creating stability, about getting our own financial house in order, about managing our resources, about putting as much of our limited taxpayer dollars into direct services for the community, and about solving challenges. And I think that you've seen this in the last few years in particular, and I think this COVID-19 emergency response has only put a spotlight on the degree to which Lane County is relied upon in our community to address challenges that we face. And I want to take a moment just to touch on this. In the budget message, you'll see, and I really want to hammer this point home, because there's been a lot of questions, around different states and nationally about response to COVID-19 and who knew what when and who was prepared and who took what action. And I thought it was really important for us to reflect on here at home. What did we do? What did Lane County do? We are the public health authority. We are the regional general government for the entire county. And so what was our response to COVID-19? On January 21st is when we became aware, the nation became aware of the first positive case of COVID-19 in the country in Washington state. On January 22nd, the day after we became aware of that, Lane County held its first coronavirus coordination meeting with the Oregon Health Authority. 5 days later, Lane County, on January 27th, Lane County conducted its first coronavirus partner coordination meeting with Peace Health and the University of Oregon. On February 6th, Lane County activated an incident command system structure to coordinate emergency response efforts. And our public health officials conducted a neighborhood association presentation about COVID-19. I'm just going to pause there and say that was on February 6th, almost a month and a half before we ever had a positive case. Our first positive case was March 17th. But as early February, we had already developed the framework via our incident command system structure to respond to the community needs and begin to coordinate efforts with residents, as well as local partners and state agencies. On March 2nd, Lane County opened a joint information center, and we held our first daily press briefing. On March 3rd, Lane County held its first healthcare provider and partner coordination call. On March 10th, we opened a non-emergency call center for the public to contact with questions. That call center remains open today. Again, on March 17th, we had our first positive case, and that was also the first death that we recorded in Lane County. We've since had one additional death for a total of two deaths as a result of COVID-19 to date. March 20th, Lane County announced, in partnership with the cities of Eugene and Springfield, a total of $400,000 in small business loan programs. This was well in advance of the federal funding that was made available. We knew there was federal funding coming, but we wanted to make, albeit limited, resources available quickly, really quickly, before the federal funds became available for our local small businesses, up to $30,000 loans, no interest for the first year, and small interest for the years after. That money through an application process was exhausted in the first day that we opened that program. March 23rd, Lane County opened the Personal Protective Equipment Donation Center at our Public Works warehouse. That remains open today. On March 24th, Lane County opened a respite shelter for unhoused residents at the Lane County Fairgrounds, including hygiene stations, mobile food service, sleeping areas, and medical services. On March 30th, Lane County opened a respite shelter in partnership with the City of Springfield and Willamette Lane Park and Recreation District for unhoused residents at the Memorial Building including hygiene stations, mobile food service, sleeping areas, and medical services. Both of those facilities remain in operation, and in addition to a parking lot, housing facility, camping operation that is operated by the City of Eugene, we've identified and are sheltering over 205 residents through those 3 operations currently. And then significantly on April 16th, Lane County closed on the purchase of the former VA clinic at 100 River Avenue for use as a COVID recovery site for at-risk populations. And that will play in significantly as we talk about the potential for a future shelter and navigation center. As the writing of our budget message, we had 48 positive cases. That was about 3 weeks ago. As of today, we have 55 positive cases and 2 deaths in Lane County. The vast majority of those 55 cases have recovered. I believe we have approximately 18 individuals that are sick at home and no one sick in the hospital. So we've done a really incredible job locally to date of flattening the curve, of making sure that our healthcare systems are not overtaxed, of making sure we have sufficient PPE for our healthcare workers and first responders, and limiting the death toll in our community. Our board talked this morning in the meeting, heard from the public, and the board took action to seek authority from the state of Oregon, from the governor in the state of Oregon, to reopen Lane County in a phased, strategic, and cautious way, but reopen nonetheless as quickly as possible. We are hopeful that we will receive the governor's approval to do that. And before the governor's, I know we had 2 commissioners, our chair and vice chair, were on a call this afternoon with the governor. Before that, the governor's guidance is even final and provided to us. The board has already taken action to make sure that we are in line and ready to begin reopening as early as May 15th, which is what the governor has said is the first day for entering into phase 1. So I wanted to just hit home on some of those things to articulate the broader point that because we have created this level of stability, because we have an incredible, while we have, we deal with scarcity of resources, we still have too little resources to fund the level of services that we need to fund. But we have an abundance of talent in Lane County. We have had now for several years a stability that has allowed us to not focus on what we don't have, but to focus on what we can do for our residents. And I think that approach, that mentality has allowed us, the great people that we have in this organization, to be able to respond to emergencies like COVID-19 and be really effective at leading our community through this challenge. I want to also touch on, so just a few of the things that Lane County has done in this emergency response is ensuring the safety of our first responders, advising healthcare professionals on testing guidelines, tracking test results, monitoring positive cases, verifying quarantine protocols are adhered to, advising those exposed to the virus, developing and implementing plans for vulnerable populations, including unhoused residents, assisting local businesses, and keeping the public informed and educated. All of that has been in addition to maintaining the regular services that are critical to the health and safety of our communities. And I'll pivot and speak for a moment just about the workplace response. I've been the first one to admit that those who asked me in early March, and I think, like when that, after the first case in Washington, and as we headed into early March, we were starting to get questions. Do you think, can we do remote work? And my response and our feeling at the time was, gosh, we have 1,600 employees, and the majority of our employees can't do their work from a remote location. And that was the belief. And we very quickly came to understand the severity of this crisis and the public health impacts, and the reality that we were not going to be able to have our workforce, 1,600 employees, coming to work every day and conducting their work in the same ways that they had always done. And so we very quickly pivoted, very quickly raised our hand and said, we were wrong about that. And we're going to have to find a way to adjust to this new normal and get our employees set up, as many of our people set up to work remotely as possible. We've had to acknowledge that still about a third of our workforce remains on site and has had to come in to do their work. Think about deputies in the jail or on patrol. Think about healthcare workers in clinics or public health workers that are working in our emergency operations centers. So these employees that are doing critical frontline work need to come in and do their work, but their ability to do their work is somewhat dependent on our ability to get the rest of our workforce working remotely. And so we have been successful at setting up approximately 900 of our employees to work remotely. We know that around 750 of our employees are actively working from home. Some are doing, as you can see, I am in my office, 2 to 3 days a week coming into the office, and then where we can work remotely, we'll do that. That transition happened within a matter of weeks. I mean, a matter of days to weeks, a week and a half to 2 weeks. We had hundreds of our employees working remotely, and it was an incredible effort on behalf of our technology services team and our departments across the organization. We further, because our approach with our workforce, and we know that our community's hurting, our businesses certainly are hurting, unemployment in the community has increased significantly, and we want to get our community back to work. What we've said for our workforce is we want to keep our people working. Let's get as many of those folks working at home as we can. We also want to make sure that our employees know that we have their backs, and we're going to create as much flexibility as we can throughout this process. So we have worked with our bargaining units and our employees to create flexibility in our paid leave options so that employees, particularly employees that fall into categories of being over 60 with underlying medical health issues, and those with childcare concerns, young children at home that were in school and when schools closed, they were impacted, or childcare, daycare facilities being closed impacted those employees. So we've really done a lot to say remote work, flexibility for paid leave. We are paying for testing, any COVID-19 testing that our employees need. We've added that benefit onto our healthcare plan because we don't want our employees to have to worry about that. We're making sure that mental health and behavioral health support is provided to employees throughout this process. So we really have led with an eye towards let's make sure that we create a culture where our employees know during the hardest times we've had their backs, because there's going to be a time at which we need to start bringing people back, and we're going to need our employees to be out there working really hard, delivering critical services for the community and having our communities' backs. So I've been really proud of the lift that our departments, our managers and supervisors and our staff throughout Lane County have done to adjust to this period of time. And it has worked, I would say, not flawlessly, but we've made it work. So I want to talk for a moment about recovery and touch on, in the proposed budget, in addition to being structurally balanced without reductions in workforce or services, and that is our goal. Our goal is to get through this crisis without having to pursue layoffs or reductions in services. And I've said to our employees, and I'll say to the budget committee, we don't have a crystal ball. We can't promise that that will be the case forever. But I, for one, think that it's really important that we don't make our first corrective action plans be reducing our workforce or asking our workforce to have to take drastic reductions, or a community to have to take drastic reductions, because we've been there in the past. And what we've done a great job of doing is creating a level of stability, of financial stewardship, and we want to keep that going. So in addition to maintaining service levels and maintaining employment, We also know that it's been a priority for the Board of Commissioners and for our community to invest in our vulnerable populations. And we've had an eye, this has been an interesting time to put a budget together because we've always had an eye on the long term. Let's make decisions today that impact our organization, our community in the long term, right? Let's do things that not only help us today, but they help us in the long term. An investment in the PERS side account, you know, is good today, but it's really good in the long term too. Paying off debt is good for today, but it helps us in the long term. Investing in additional supportive housing and reducing homelessness helps us today, but the further upstream we can get in that process, the more it will help us in the future by reducing costs and improving lives in our community. So, you know, we've done this in the last several years. We've made investments as we've stabilized our budget. We've made investments in mental health services in the jail. We've invested $2 million in federal funds that we received that was one-time money in a housing improvement program focused on permanent supportive housing. Last year, we put a $1 million investment in a behavioral crisis center. We've had several new permanent supportive housing projects, including our 51-unit permanent supportive housing project at the MLK campus. We've purchased a new office for our parole and probation team. We're making an investment in new space for a developmental disabilities operation. And again, we purchased the former VA clinic. All of these things are intended to move the needle on improving housing, reducing homelessness, and setting up our critical operations for stability and greater success in the future. And so, as we've had our eye on the long-term reduction in homelessness and investing in permanent supportive housing for our community, we also recognize that as we're putting this budget together, COVID-19 hit us, and the people most impacted by COVID-19 are our most vulnerable populations. They are the people that are either currently unhoused or on the verge of becoming unhoused. Our board today and for several weeks has heard public comment about individuals, renters struggling with unemployment. And now the rent, you know, we know that the state has put evictions, a moratorium on evictions, but at some point the rent is going to come due and our residents are going to have to pay that cost. And as they've dealt with unemployment, what is that going to look like? And so we want to do whatever we can to be investing in those areas. So this proposed budget includes $1.3 million in additional investments in both the operations of a 24/7 low barrier public shelter and navigation center, as we've talked about with the board. It is going to require community partners to step up and help support that, as has been the case in a number of our other initiatives with the MLK Permanent Supportive Housing Project and other projects where we have Homes for Good in the city of Eugene and healthcare partners that all come together and support that effort, because it really is in the best, not only the best interest of the community and the people we serve, but it lowers the costs for all of our other system partners. So we've included our investment in opening that shelter and navigation center later this year. We've also included funding as part of, as part of that in what we call rapid resolution. Rapid resolution is an attempt to get, give me 1 second, I've been talking for a while. Rapid resolution is our attempt to get further upstream in the housing and homelessness crisis. It's a housing intervention designed to prevent immediate homelessness once someone enters a shelter, transitional housing, or an unsheltered situation. It includes both diversion and rapid exit strategies with the aim of ensuring that homelessness is either avoided or is as brief as possible when it does occur. So think about rapid resolution as a phased approach to help people identify housing options. It's not a program, and it occurs before any formal documented assessment takes place. It takes place prior to assessing people for resources within the homelessness service system. So before they enter the coordinated entry system, to see if people already have access to resources that can help them resolve their homelessness without having to rely on system resources. So it's actually capturing people before they get into the coordinated entry system and working intensively with those individuals to get them rehoused. So what it really is a problem-solving conversation. It's working directly with those individuals that are facing the prospect of being unhoused and figuring out how we can help a household identify an immediate safe place to stay without their own network of family or within their own network of family, friends, and other social supports, even if that solution is temporary. Because we know, we can talk about the FUs, the frequent utilizers of system engagement, and we know the data shows us you get someone connected, someone who is unhoused, connected to housing, to a stable housing situation, all the other costs in our system drop. Law enforcement arrests, jail intakes, health insurance costs, ER room visits, they all drop. So this is, you see what we're doing here? We're getting a little bit, we're swimming upstream to make the investment as far upstream as we can. So this is, we can talk more about rapid rehousing, and I see some smiles on faces, and so I don't want to spend too much time because we'll have that, and you'll be able to hear from people much more knowledgeable than I about that. But we're really excited about those investments. And we know that the temptation may be to say, well, how can we make a new investment in something when we have, the sky is falling? We don't know what the long-term picture looks like. And I would say, I'm not sure the sky is falling. And I will, as we get closer to a wrap up here, I will say that there are areas for us to be seriously concerned about. And we need to be strategic and focused and disciplined in understanding those areas and making sure we don't incur additional costs in areas where we have significant projected declines in revenues. But our view is that now more than ever is the time that we need to be making investments in areas where our community is hurting the most. And these are at least a few areas that we feel are really critical. So the other thing I wanted to talk about was the businesses and the local economy and workers. So support for vulnerable populations and those most impacted by COVID-19 was one piece that I talked about with Shelter Navigation Center and Rapid Rehousing. And the other one is an understanding that our business community needs our support. Small businesses and in industries that have been significantly impacted by COVID-19. And we know that, our economy in Lane County has struggled. We continue to reinvent our local economy from a heavy reliance on timber industry, which continues to be part of our local economy. But we continue to need to reinvent and think about how can we make investments and support businesses to round out our economy and make sure that it is diverse, vibrant, and resilient to withstand these kinds of challenges. So a few investments that I'll touch on as part of our economic development work. Our focus in supporting businesses and our local workforce is broadly to help businesses and communities realize, understand, and adapt to new consumer patterns, the new economy, essentially. And so we are looking at data and trying to understand how are consumers, we're all doing this in our own personal lives. How are we acting differently? How are we making purchases differently than we did before? And how can we, Lane County, help the local business community adjust? We can't continue, we can't think about, the idea that we're just going to be a revolving loan program constantly and putting cash out there for everyone in need is something that we don't have the ability to do in the long term. but using expertise to provide technical assistance to our business community to help them adapt to this new economy and become more resilient is really an area that we think we can add value. Investing in multi-value infrastructure such as broadband or small community, rural community projects. I think the Lowell, there's a Lowell community project that's really critical that they've asked for our help on that addresses immediate needs while building long-term resiliency, and then providing focused financial resources for our business community that leverage additional investment from other sources and address those disproportionately impacted by COVID-19 pandemic. So think our rural, small, and minority-owned businesses in particular. A few investments, and we'll have more time in the future to dive into these, but we have included a partnership with the Oregon Manufacturing Extension Partnership to connect manufacturers in Lane County to OMEP's business continuity support programs to do things like sales impact and market analyses, financial performance, leadership and communication plans, supply chain management, and operational planning and staffing. And to identify manufacturers who were disproportionately impacted by COVID-19 and help support them. We're additionally proposing a partnership with Bring Recycling to help, because Bring is both a manufacturer and in the energy efficiency territory. And so we feel like it's a nice fit with the priorities of our board, and then support for our local communities. And so we can talk about, again, we can talk about these in more detail in the future, but I wanted to just touch on what we think is really important support both for vulnerable communities and for our local economy. I'm going to close here by, just mentioning, as we did in the budget message, that we are concerned about a number of funds. We're concerned generally, and we're keeping our eye on the long-term horizon. There's a lot that is uncertain. It's really cloudy and murky when you get 6 to 9 months out and beyond. It's really hazy, and we don't know what it looks like. We don't know what state revenues are going to look like. We don't know what's going to happen with our housing, our local housing market, and local property taxes, foreclosures, delinquent taxes. All of those things are really uncertain. What we do know is that in the very short term, we've seen significant declines in areas that you wouldn't be surprised that are driven by tourism and consumer spending. Things like transient room taxes, car rental taxes, video lottery dollars, and fees for service in area. People aren't going to our parks and paying parking fees or paying camping fees. People have not been booking events at the Lane Event Center. And so the revenue for those types of operations have been significant, but the tax funding and the fees that we collect for those areas have been significantly impacted. State funding, we're particularly concerned about the Lane County behavioral health operation and state funding that did not come in the short session. And so we have a hole there that we're working on creating a corrective action plan that avoids layoffs, but that is going to have to reduce some funded but vacant positions and try to seek some additional revenue there. Roads, we're monitoring the impact on the reduction in gas taxes because people are not driving as they were before. And parole and probation is an area, as Commissioner Bozovich knows, being on the Public Safety Coordinating Council and the Budget Committee there, the governor has asked for up to 20% reduction options from all the departments. And I believe we've been asked by Department of Corrections for 8.5% to 10% cuts. So we're nervous about the impact on state funding because people are unemployed and incomes have dropped and the state is heavily reliant on income taxes. And that inevitably will have an impact on us here. So I want to caution that as we go through this budget process, it is likely the long-term picture will remain murky. You all and I and others are not going to have the answers that we need to make long-term decisions. What we need to do is make the best decisions with the information that we have at our disposal. So we'll do our best to present you with the best information. I will say that I'm comforted by our ability to weather this storm because we've done a great job planning for exactly the situation that we're in. Part of what we've done in the last several years is build our reserves to the point that we can withstand an emergency like this. Now that won't help us forever. So that's not a long-term solution. That's a short-term stopgap. And so we do need to think about how long-term increases in expenses will impact us and long-term declines in revenues will impact us. I'm going to close now just by saying that there's a lot of kind of detail there and strategy. And the Board of Commissioners knows and our staff knows that I'm a big fan of strategic planning and identifying your strategic focus and being laser focused on that. And you can't be all things to all people. You got to really focus on the things that are most important and just hit that out of the park. We have our strategic plan. We revise it regularly. We update it. We have metrics. The board carries around our laminated one pager and we refer to it. And every decision we make, we try to make sure we go back to that plan so it's impacting our decisions every day. But I will also tell you that as important as strategy is, I'm a firm believer. I can't remember who made this, so I didn't come up with this saying, but I really like the line, culture eats strategy for breakfast. So strategy is good, but culture is way better. And so what we really have done in this organization in the last several years in this stability and can-do approach has been about creating, it's not about having a handful of really smart people in the organization to make all the decisions. It's about creating a culture where we all 1,600 of us in our community, our residents are part of that, understand that we are empowered to be leaders, that we are empowered to make good decisions, we're empowered to come up with creative solutions to problems. And there, even with limited resources, there's a lot we can do in solving community challenges. So our purpose, to improve lives. Every employee in our organization is committed to that singular purpose, to improve lives, no matter what their role is. Our core behaviors, a passion to serve, a drive to connect, and a focus on solutions. Those are the three core behaviors, and we have the coins to prove it, that we value most in our employees, that they demonstrate the best of us. When we're doing our best work, we demonstrate those three behaviors. Our strategic focus and our financial discipline have gotten us to this place of greater resilience, and we'll need to call on that as we pivot to the future. So I know that was I went a little bit over my time. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I'm happy to answer any questions. Christine Moody will have more details on the budget for you, but I look forward to going through this process and paving a bright future for Lane County. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Steve. We'll take a couple quick questions directly related to Steve's presentation, or feel free to write those out and provide them to the budget staff, and Steve will answer those offline if that's better.
Herb, this is Pete. I have a question when you call on me.
Excellent. I want to welcome Joe. Good to see you, Joe.
Good to see everybody. Thank you for allowing me to do the same thing with the Springfield Economic Development Agency.
Thank you. Okay, Pete, what do you got?
Steve, I wanted to ask you a question about the approach, and that is to, I guess, live within the means that we believe we're being given. That would mean in the case of the car rental tax that we likely won't be collecting in the first half of the fiscal year. So that'll hurt some of the programs helped by the car rental tax. Similarly, the programs helped by the gas tax or the transient room tax. So are you basing the projected income based upon what you truly believe the income will be, or are you relying upon past averages and therefore you're blunting the impact of the recession and/or depression that we are entering into.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Sorensen. That's a really good question. I'll let Christine talk more specifically about how we've treated revenues. It's important to know that the proposed budget that we're discussing tonight begins July 1st. So a lot of, we're still in, we're in a different fiscal year than the one that we're proposing next year. So there were some places that we did make some adjustments, but we did not make drastic adjustments in revenue because we just don't have enough information. We know that transient room taxes and car rental taxes and video lottery have been hit in March and April and will be in May. But as the economy starts to open up in May and June and into July, we don't know what that picture is going to look like. So we did not make drastic projections to significantly reduce those revenues. I will say this, that a budget, just like a strategic plan, is it should be a living and breathing document. Just because you propose a budget or you amend a budget or you adopt a budget doesn't mean you stop adjusting it. We have 4 times a year that we come back and do supplemental budget adjustments. And we always use the best information, the best data we have available at that time to adjust our projections, both from a revenue and an expense standpoint. So hopefully that answers your question. The reality is there's a lot that we still do not know. We still don't even know. I talked to Christine tonight about, I think, transient room taxes. The latest numbers we got in were still pre-COVID. So I did see Traveling County projected something like a 60% decline in transient room taxes for the last month or so. We haven't seen those numbers. So we want to make sure that any projections are really based on the data that we have available to us.
Thank you. And some of the commissioners were on the call with the economic development people from the state, and they reported just for the month of March data, 2019 March to comparing to 2020 March, a decline of 90% in the video lottery sales, most of which goes to education and economic development.
Okay, thank you. I think what we'll do is we'll refer the rest of the questions to Steve's presentations. If you would write those up and send those to the budget staff, we'll go ahead and move forward with Ms. Moody's part of the presentation, please. You're still on mute, Christine.
Yes, I am. Sorry about that. I do believe that we've had a few additional people join the meeting, including Commissioner Burney. So I don't know if you want to ensure that we have a good roll call for that. Has anyone else called in since the meeting started and we took roll call? Maybe not. Okay, we thought we saw a few callers come on too. The only thing I'll mention maybe really quick before I get into my presentation on the questions is, as you're saying, write down the questions. I know the committee members who have been on the committee for a while are used to note cards in front of you, makes it easy to write them down, but we are asking if you could email those to us. So either any of us individually who have sent you an email, feel free to send that back. We aren't really using the chat feature during these meetings. So if you could email them, we'll make sure and get them out to the proper directors and get those back to you. So I have a budget overview presentation for you. And as Mr. Mokrahysky was just mentioning, this budget was developed pre-COVID. But the data is not well known enough for us to suggest adjustments at this point. So what you're going to hear from me tonight is going to represent what departments built beginning in January of this year. So someone else is running my slides, but so we'll kind of go to the first one here. Okay, so here is a very colorful, all of our funds chart for you. And I know you can't really read that text. It's pretty small, but this is the 33 funds that exist in the county, just to give you an idea of the different pieces. The special revenue funds, which have restrictions on them, and some of our other funds do too, but special revenue funds in particular, make up about 46% of our budget. Go ahead. Here is by type of fund, as I mentioned, the Special Revenue Fund 46. But here I'm showing you by type of fund. We have our general fund, which I will cover in a little more detail at the end of the presentation on its own. We have a multitude of special revenue funds. We have debt service funds that we use to make our bond payments or if we have any notes outstanding. We have a capital fund. Enterprise funds, which operate more closer to what the private business would. You will see those at Solid Waste and Lane Event Center are both in enterprise funds. Our internal service fund is where we're collecting fees from our departments and then providing service. So our technology services, TS department is in an internal service fund. We also have our benefit fund there and our risk fund. So we're collecting monies and putting them there. And then a fiduciary fund, and the county has one fund in that category, and we refer to it as a retiree medical fund. It's a legacy benefit that was provided to employees, and that is the funding to pay for that benefit in the coming years. Go ahead. So the total FTE for 2021 is 1732, and that's an overall increase of just about 23.5 FTE. I'm showing you the FTE here by service category. And then on these slides, which we will also send out to you, and of course these will be posted online, I'm providing you with the page numbers in the proposed budget document where you can get more information. So if you want to dig into those a little bit more, you'll also hear about these increases specifically from departments as they give their presentations. Go ahead. It's being a little slow here. So especially for our new members, I like to revisit some budget basics for us and some terminology that you'll hear us use and departments use as they give presentations. In budget, we have revenue and then we have resources. So our revenue is going to be our property tax, non-property tax, any money received from a funding source. We refer to it as our ongoing revenue in most cases. And then we have resources, which includes all of that revenue, but also includes any fund balance that we're carrying forward from the prior year or any one-time fund transfers that might be coming into the fund. And then on the other side of the equation, we have expenditures and requirements. Our expenditures are personnel, material and services, capital, and debt service. Our department budgets will show you their expenditure numbers are going to include their personnel, their material and services, and their capital. And then debt service you'll find in the fund budget. And then on top of expenditures, you'll get to requirements, which is going to be all of those expenditures I just listed, plus any interfund transfers, and then our contingencies and reserves. Go ahead and go to the next. Here's some other, I won't read through all of these, but you could refer back to these. Terminology that we'll use: appropriation, that is the authorization for spending a specific amount of money. Budget law is designed to limit expenditures. So when we adopt the budget, we will actually put the dollar amount that a fund is allowed to spend. So that's the appropriation level for that fund. And then when we're doing supplementals or adjustments, we're changing that number up and down. The different types of expenditures that I just listed here are defined for you. And contingency and reserve. Yeah, go ahead. You're good. So in local budget law, the fund is actually the top of the structure. So you have a department within the fund. So that's the next level down. And then we have the classifications of the type of expenses that occur within the department. So you will see that we have to balance all 33 of our individual funds separately. So if you compare that to a private business, instead of having one bottom line for the business, we have 33 bottom lines, and then we balance the entire budget as a whole. Go ahead. This just goes further into those object classifications, again, showing you the types of expenditures, what you will find in a fund versus in a department. And then the requirements, the transfers, contingencies, and reserves, those you will find in a fund budget. And I'm going to point some of this out to you in the budget document, but you won't find reserves, contingencies, or transfers out within a department's budget. That belongs to the fund. So a balanced budget means that we're going to balance our resources, that larger number, against our requirements. So those two have to equal to have a legally balanced budget under budget law. Lane County takes our budget a step further, as you've already heard the terminology used, and we structurally balance our funds. So that means that we're looking to make sure that we have ongoing revenue that equals our ongoing expenditures. And so that we're not using a term that we say often is we're not using our savings account to pay our mortgage. And that provides stability in the budget, especially in downturns like we're seeing now. Go ahead. So here is just some high-level different types of charts than what you'll see in the budget document, although all of this information is there. Here is the total revenue for 2021 is $455 million, and I've put it on here from largest to smallest. So state revenue is sitting at the top of our revenue. And so that's important, especially as mentioned, that if they have budget struggles, that can trickle down to the county. Our internal fees and charges, those things that you're seeing in those internal service funds, is the second largest, and then goes down to taxes and assessments, federal revenues, or fees and charges, and some other smaller pieces below. I'm showing you here the comparison between current year is the more red bar, and then the 2021 budget that you have in front of you is the blue bar. Here are the pieces that are not in that revenue equation, but the other resources. So fund balance as a whole for the county, you can see it decreasing from 1920 to 2021. Transfers between funds are going up. You'll hear about a few larger ones, and then some of it is just as services grow. The general fund transfers money out to some of our special revenue funds and Health and Human Services and other places to provide services. As those costs go up, our transfers go up. A big piece of this, though, is a one-time transfer you're going to hear about in Health and Human Services for our Lane Care, from our Lane Care Fund, and then some capital fund transfers that are occurring. We have intra-fund transfers, so that's if programs, divisions within the same fund are transferring money. Many times that's for administrative charges within a department. So you'll see those in Health and Human Services in particular. And then the county doesn't have an inter-fund loan in 2021. We did have one in 1920. It was related to our telephone upgrade, and that was paid off in 1920. So you won't see that there. And there are a few page references there for you to find more information. Those page reference numbers will be in the non-departmental tab. So that's where you're going to find those fund level expenses that I mentioned. On the expenditure side, here's broken down by the 4 different types of expenditures: material and services, personnel, capital, and debt. You will see that material and services is going down as compared to the current year. That's a result of one-time expenses happening in 1920 and those going away in 2021. Expenses are going up. Capital, as I mentioned, we have a few capital projects that you'll hear more about. And debt shows that it's increasing, but that is only because we are finally going to be actually sending the payment in to pay off the customer service center, the road fund. That was actually set aside in a debt service fund. I believe it was 3 or 4 fiscal years ago, but we had to wait until that bond was actually callable. You can't pay bonds off before they are callable. So that is actually occurring in this year. So the money was already set aside, but this is actually going to be the payment out to that debt. On the other requirements, so here are the transfers again, the interfund, intra, the contingencies that are happening out in departments. So those are appropriated in, like if you looked at a board order, you're going to see contingencies listed. But if a department or a fund needed to move contingencies and actually spend it, there would have to be a board order or a supplemental budget involved. So we have our funds set aside contingencies for unanticipated expenses. Reserves you can only move in a supplemental budget, and sometimes a board order is a little bit faster to get to the board and adjust that if needed. So that's why we do keep some funds within our contingency line. And then you see the other side of that interfund loan payment equation, and it not existing in 2021 because it is paid off. Here, this chart, also a little small for you to see, but I've actually cut and pasted this right out of the proposed document. So you can see this in the non-departmental section under our reserves. Just to talk a little bit about why does the county have reserves? Well, you've heard some of that tonight from Steve Mokrahysky on the need to have reserves in the event of something occurring. We do also need to have them for cash flow. The general fund relies on property tax, and those funds do not start coming in until November. But with the fiscal year starting in July, we have to have cash flow to pay expenses until that point. It helps our bond rating, so our credit rating. So they look specifically at reserves in the general fund and some of our larger funds to see if they believe that it rates our credit worthiness. We have increased our reserve rates in recent years, and we have seen a direct correlation to our bond rating being increased in recent years also. The need for future equipment or future capital purchases, it's a way to save up for something, so that it plays also. And then the service and revenue stabilizing. So even in our reserve policy, we talk about if there's an economic downturn, if there's a revenue fluctuation, and also to protect assets in places like the road fund and the landfill. So here are a few highlighted budget changes. These are within the financial and planning summary. Near the back of that tab, you're going to see a couple pages entitled balancing options. So these are highlighted there also. So this is definitely not all the changes occurring in the budget, but just a few to highlight. You heard about the 1.3 million that has been set aside for operations for a navigation center shelter. We have added 4 FTE in our facilities budget to begin implementing a facility assessment that was completed. There's a 1 FTE deputy assessor that will be a temporary position for a couple years as we prepare for the retirement of our current assessor in January 2023. There is a reduction of 3 FTE in Lane County Behavioral Health. You will hear about those. And then a one-time transient room tax video lottery for some Stewart Bridge repairs. So that is a one-time expenditure occurring. This is the 5th year in a row for low or no increases to employee health insurance costs per employee. And we also have increased our membership, our county level membership for Government Alliance on Race and Equity, which is referred to as GARE. So now to cover a little bit on the general fund specifically.
Could I ask a quick question?
Yes,
I apologize. 1, what is GARE? 2, how much should we increase our membership from what to what? And 3, what does the county get out of that?
So can you go back? Because I actually forget what the acronym stands for. I was reading it. Government Alliance.
Yes.
Government Alliance.
Not a big deal. I'm just curious because you've identified this was one of 9 highlighted changes.
Yeah, and I will, and mainly I'm pulling things that are general fund related. So that is, except for that decrease in behavioral health and the transient room tax. So I will have to get you some of those answers, Commissioner, but I can tell you, I believe the amount we increased it was, you know what, I don't even want to say for sure because now I'm not remembering the number. So let me get those answers for you and we'll
I apologize. Thanks for the interruption.
So the general operating fund is the general operating fund of the county. Services include public safety, sheriff's office, district attorney, youth services, and our justice courts. Assessment and taxation, elections, public health, animal services, property management, and a lot of our central services, including finance, budget, facilities, county administration, county council, are all within the general fund. Between 30 to 35% of the county FTE is paid for by the general fund. You can see some of this in the service option sheets that you have in your binder or in Dropbox. There's a summary of those service option sheets at the back of the general fund tab in your budget document. And they will detail every general fund dollar, discretionary dollar that is being spent. So you can see those types of services and different places where we are investing in FTE, some of them outside of the general fund and then others within the general fund, as I've mentioned. So here's that same pie chart again, but pulling out the slice of the pie that is the general fund, just to give you an idea of size compared to the rest of the budget. The 2021 budget will be $116.9 million. That is a slight decrease from the current year. That decrease is primarily occurring because we're spending some one-time money in the current year. The FTE is 426.6 FTE, which is an increase of 8.25. And I've mentioned primarily some of those on the back, and then you'll hear about other ones from departments as they present their budgets to you. So when talking about general fund, we refer to discretionary general fund versus department activity funds. So the service information sheets were detailing the discretionary general fund that is being spent. Those are funds that are generally not occurring within a department. The one exception I will tell you about is property taxes. So the property tax revenue is received into the general fund as a whole. It does not go into assessment and taxation's general fund budget, but that of course is reliant on their department activity. But the property tax revenue is completely discretionary. The Board of Commissioners and Budget Committee can allocate those funds wherever they see the need. Other funds that are in that discretionary bucket are including some of our state shared revenue, liquor tax, we have amusement tax, cigarette tax, other pieces there. We also have any of the timber revenue that's coming in from the Bureau of Land Management, the BLM piece, O&C timber is in there. And then some various other small taxes that come in. So we receive those funds into the fund itself. They don't go into one department, and we refer to those as discretionary, and they're allocated out to the departments and the services, again, looking at those service option sheets. So on the next page here, we show that discretionary general fund and breaking it down by service category. So this also correlates back to those service option sheets, but you can see the allocations of that money and the percentage that's occurring in those service categories. Here is the general fund resources, so including the revenue and those other items. Comparison by type, and I'm showing you year over year. So the fund balance is decreasing, is the one that you see that's really going down. It's the second from the left. That is because of spending down and in particular transferring some money out in 1920 for the developmental disabilities building. On the other side of the equation here are the general fund requirements. So personnel services being the primary expense within the general fund, followed by material and services. There are fund transfers out of the general fund, as I mentioned, over to health and human services, a little bit to public works, animal services, to provide services in those funds. And then you see the contingencies and reserves, and that reserve decreasing because of that transfer I just mentioned, going out for the development of disabilities, which is $5 million, and then the spending down of some of the one-time funds that we had. So this is a chart that we refer to as the JAWS graph. This is looking forward in the general fund. So I do a 5-year general fund forecast. And in general, when we look out past about a year or two, our revenues do not typically grow as fast as our expenses. And so you see that in the first year here that's showing, and this isn't specific dollars or years here, but this is just to give you an example of it, is that as revenues don't keep up with expenses, then expenses will go above revenues. And so this is a structural imbalance that occurs. For us, it occurs a lot because of our low property tax rate. And anytime we have expenses that are more difficult for us to control, PERS rates are a good example of that. If things are increasing higher than our revenue, then we have to do some more strategic planning around how we're going to keep those expenses in line with our revenues. And we've done a lot of that in recent years by looking at our internal services, really focusing on the health insurance, which used to really drive this structural imbalance in the out years. And in recent years, we've done a great job of bringing that back into line every year. The economy, of course, has helped that, having a strong housing economy and those things. So when we look out very far, we do see that structural balance beginning to reoccur in the general fund, but we'll just have to see as we go. So the next couple years are fairly stable, at least in the forecast, and we'll see what we have when we get more recent data. So some future cautions that I will highlight too, and the Budget Committee heard about these same ones last year. There's a couple of them that are repeats here. Wages, we have, it was a very tight labor market there before COVID, and so unemployment was very low and wages were increasing. And so this chart actually looks to what PERS projects for our wages each biennium. So a steady growth in the out years, and this has been market adjustments, cost of living increases. I will say that in the proposed budget, you will see any cost of living increases or market adjustments that have already been approved by the Board of Commissioners are part of the budget. If something has not been approved yet, it is not in the budget yet. So we do expect PERS rate increases to continue to go up in the years. And so as mentioned, the county has set aside the $10 million that we're going to start a side account. And what that does is we will send that money to PERS, they will invest it, and they will use that to pay down our rate over, we're still deciding on, the board needs to decide on the term of that, how long they want that pay down to occur. So that will help offset our rate. But in the, until the 29-31 biennium, the last PERS projections were still that we will still see our rates increasing. Our rates are adjusted every 2 years, so the proposed budget in front of you does not have an employer rate increase. We are flat this year. So we'll be looking at the 21-22 budget to see what that rate change will be. And we don't know that rate change yet. We will find it out later this fall. The county also has aging capital assets. You'll see that there's, as I mentioned, there's quite a bit of capital investment in this budget. We also have a capital improvement plan, a county-wide plan that looks out 5 years to identify projects and also identifies known needs, even if we have not identified funding and completed a planning process. So there's more information. We have a CIP document out there that you can find on our website. But this is a known risk to us and our budget going forward as our buildings age. And of course, what we're hearing about our most recent caution is COVID-19 and what is occurring with increased expenses to local governments, lost revenues, and then what the long-term economic impact will be. You will see each department provide a slide similar to this, where they're going to identify for you where they believe there are revenues at risk, and then maybe also the ones that are not at risk as much. And so the ones that have been mentioned so far, transient room tax, car rental tax, gas tax, our fees for service, potential certain state funding. But then the places where we're not as concerned as of yet are property taxes. The way our system is designed, it will take a while for any decrease if the housing market decreases to occur there. What we might see is a slowing down of payments, or potentially individuals choosing to pay it in the 3 installments instead of paying it all in November for those who don't pay it through their mortgage. But we're working closely with the assessor on that to see what he's projecting for the future. We also have a lot of contracts for services that are not as at risk. And then many of our grants that have already been awarded. So those are the places that I've seen departments identifying so far. As was mentioned, departments are indicating that we just really don't have good data to really make specific changes to the budget yet. But if we do get any before you're approving, we will make sure and provide those to you. But for the most part, we know that things are occurring, like the transient room tax. We know that occupancy is down, but the tax payments that we've actually received are still based on pre-COVID. So we don't know those actual dollar amounts yet. So many of those adjustments will have to happen either if we do find out before the board adopts in June, we can make adjustments then, or of course those supplemental budgets that were mentioned. So we want to keep the budget as relevant as possible and adjust it when we know, but we don't want to guess and have wildly inaccurate figures going forward either. And so just to wrap up, as has been mentioned, we have great foundational strengths that help us in our budget preparation. The strategic plan is looked to, and you will see departments report to you on some of their metrics and how their specific plans feed back into the county level plan. We have very strong financial policies. Our bond rating was increased in this last year. We have a service stabilization reserve in the general fund, structurally balancing the budget. We also, one thing I haven't mentioned is that we budget for a vacancy variance in our funds. And what that means is typically most governments will budget for 100% employment. So their FTE is budgeted for every position to be filled every day. We know that that's not accurate. So a few years ago, we started looking back at the data to see what we could project going forward for what our vacancy rate was. We're still being very conservative on that. We don't want to under budget because the idea is not to slow down services anyway. It's just to accurately budget that personnel number. So we also take that into account when we're building the budget instead of waiting to the end of the year to see what we didn't spend. And then planning for known expenses. So if we know that we're going to have to replace something in 5 years, we're setting money aside every year so that we don't have a big bill in 5 years. So that has been a strategy of the board for a long time, from everything from computers to vehicles to buildings. So we're working towards building up those reserves to take care of our assets. Community trust building. So a lot of other ways. The only things I've mentioned here is public safety levy, but that is just one of the many, many examples where I think the county has led and built community trust, which helps us through times like these. And our people and partnerships. So the diverse, highly skilled workforce is deeply committed to delivering services to Lane County residents. And I think you're seeing that through this crisis. And that is all I have.
Thank you, Ms. Moody. I think what we'll do is we'll defer all questions to written questions for Christine's presentation. Christine, I would like you to go ahead and cover the pieces that you need to cover before we go into public comment.
Sure. So you should all have a different login. So we're going to log off of this meeting, log back onto the GoToWebinar, and then we have Tanya Ellis in the budget office who will help facilitate that public comment. So she has people who have signed up. I believe we have 5 is the last number that we saw. She will kind of walk through that and we'll go from there. So we should see you all in a few minutes.
Right. So a question about the process. Are we, is it okay, are we able to take a break here and basically say that we're going to reconvene at 7:15 and then people could have a bio break and they get a time to log in? Is that the plan?
Gosh, I wish there was somebody in the room here to tell me if they can put that message on the screen. Let me make sure if I'm getting a text here. I think somebody's. Yeah, we can, yes, you can do that. Okay. We can start the meeting so that we can have the public dial in, but then we just won't have you on camera yet. So yes, please go ahead and take a break, 7:15.
A bio break. Okay.
Yes. And then one additional question, Christine. So will somebody be introducing the speakers for us?
Yes, Tanya can do that. Yes. So yes, so I don't know if you probably haven't seen a board meeting, but the board chair basically turns it over. You can turn it over to Tanya to facilitate the public comment. So she'll have a timer that she'll bring up on the screen and she'll call their names and let them know that they can start. And then we'll let you know when we're done with speakers.
Excellent. So let's, committee, let's go ahead and take my bio break right here. And then we'll reconvene at 7:15. And as soon as everybody's in, we'll start the process for public comment. Okay. Very good. Thank you. and reconvene here with the public hearing part of our meeting today. If the budget staff
Mr. Chair,
could go ahead and move forward.
Mr. Chair, could you give a listing of who's on the call, the committee members?
I could do that. So for the committee, we have Don Leslie, Jay Bosevich, Heather Buck, Larry Abel, Pete Sorensen, Bill Stormberg, Pat Farr, and myself, Herb Volodman. Anybody else from the committee on?
Yes, Chris Hazen.
Okay, Chris. Thank you. Okay, budget staff, you want to take it away?
Yes. When I call your name, you will begin your public comment. The timer will start and I will unmute you. The first person for public comment is James New. James, you can begin your public comment.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Commissioners, thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. The coronavirus pandemic has physically and financially affected communities, especially at the state and county level. Lane County is no exception, providing emergency funding for increased public services. At the March 31st Board of Commission meeting, the commissioners voiced concerns about future county budget shortfalls due to the pandemic. Commissioner Bosevich talked about and I quote, a county budget crisis due to the pandemic for the next couple of years, and stated at the April 22nd Board of Commissioners meeting, and I quote, conservatives believe in conserving. Commissioner Bosevich comments give credence that Lane County should be prudent in conserving their expenditures and forego funding membership in the Association of Oregon and California Counties. I couldn't agree more. I urge the Lane County Board of Commissioners to eliminate funding for AOCC membership for the next several years or permanently. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak tonight.
Thank you for your public comment. The next person for public comment is Kim Kelly. Kim Kelly, I will unmute your mic and you are good to go.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for allowing us to speak with you. I'm really just reiterating what the previous speaker said. Thanks again for your decision to end Lane County's membership of the AOCC. We certainly don't want our tax dollars going toward funding a secretive organization that is really not accountable to the public. So that is just reiteration of the previous gentleman. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for your public comment. The next person for public comment is Linda Perini. Linda, I will unmute you and you are allowed to begin your public comment.
Good evening. I'm Linda Perrine. And I want to thank everyone for making the Budget Committee available online. And I'm hoping Lane County is actually enjoying the opportunity to tune in from home from these meetings and make this a possibility in the future for public meetings. I was part of the group that spoke a year ago or so when we brought forward the notion of AOCC funding being withheld. And the reasons still stand that the organization is not conducting its affairs publicly, does not publish its minutes publicly. And they still have a policy that benefits the forestry industry and doesn't really entertain different points of view. So I see the AOCC funding as a mechanism to hopefully produce some changes in that organization. And if they are able to become a more balanced operation and much more publicly run, that would be an opportunity to discuss funding that again. But as they stand today, I don't see how, with all of the COVID-19 expenditures that AOCC is a worthy use of funds for the coming year. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your public comment. That is all of the registered public comments. So Chair, I'll send it back over to you.
Very good, thank you. So that takes us to the end of our public hearing agenda item. Does budget staff have any other information for the committee about the next meeting or any other technical details?
Just a reminder that the meeting on Thursday is at 1:30.
Okay. So Thursday's meeting is at 1:30, and it's a go-to meeting, if I understand correctly. And then, if we can, any other questions from committee members about committee process? Okay. Hearing none, that takes us to the end. Oh, Jay, go ahead, please.
Thank you. First question, whether Christine's slideshow will be available online to the public. I wanted to ask a specific question about a slide in that, but we kind of had to rush straight into the public hearing. In particular, there was a slide that showed revenues and showed state revenues actually increasing from one budget year to the next. And I was kind of curious about that, knowing what I've seen, and kind of to correct something that Mr. Mokrahysky said. The state is asking agencies for an 8.5% across the board budget cut plan at this time, which, you know, Community Corrections Act funding for parole and probation is part of that. But they want that 8.5% to be for the biennium, and there's only a year left in the biennium, so it's a 17% cut that they're having agencies draw up for the next year, because they have to get that 8.5% in only 1 year. So I noticed on that one slide it showed revenue going up, and I wish I'd had an opportunity to ask the question before we went into the public hearing portion of our meeting. So I'm not quite sure when there'll be some appropriate time to ask some questions with the public listening, rather than just emailing some questions in, relative to that. I also was kind of concerned whether PERS projections have taken into account the hit the stock market took and what that does to the unfunded liability of PERS, which gets related in rate increases. So those two things were particularly of interest to me that were part of Christine's presentation, and be helpful also to have those slides.
So Chair, I am here. I can answer those if you would like. So first of all, I'll let you know that my slides will be up on the website, likely tomorrow. I won't promise tonight, but they will definitely be up tomorrow along with Steve's. The budget was completely built before the COVID crisis, before what the state is asking for scenarios. So that state revenue increase was based on what we knew back in January, February. Even at this point where they are asking us for scenarios, we still don't feel like we have enough data to actually change specific numbers yet. But if we get that before the budget committee approves, then we will definitely let you know those adjustments. And then, yes, there are some places that we're hearing about where we do expect in the future to have to make changes. So that timing will be the piece there. And then on the PERS projections, that screenshot that I showed was an older projection for PERS rates. We actually, as part of our side account setup, we have asked for an actuary to be done on just Lane County by the actuary who does all of those projections. That projection that I showed was a system projection. So we'll get some data specific to Lane County before we make that decision on the PERS side account. And the thing to remember about the rates is, although we've had a few, we've had a downturn most recently, the rates will not be set until the next biennium. And so we still have, I attended a PERS board meeting and they reiterated there's still time to make up some of that downturn. So it is based on what happens through the end of this calendar year. And then they will set our rates. So we'll watch for that. And we'll let the board know as soon as we hear about that unfunded liability and how fast it might impact our rates.
Thank you.
Yes.
Jay?
Thank you, Christine. Larry, you got a question?
Yeah, Jay, I wanted to ask Jay if that 17% cut, does that just affect parole and probation?
No, they're asking for that across all agencies, but parole and probation's funding is almost entirely Community Corrections Act funding, which would have a similar cut. Not quite sure whether the Justice Reinvestment grants will be cut back by a similar amount, but that's 25% of Lane County's budget is derived from state revenue. So when they're talking about a 17% cut
Across the board.
Across the board over the next year, and I see a budget projection showing an increase in state revenue, that makes me extremely nervous that we're not planning correctly. And I know the 17% is not set in stone, and in fact, one of the issues they have is the reason they're talking about across the board is without the legislature convening, that's the only tool the governor has is across the board cuts. To do anything other than across the board, it takes legislative action. So there's some unknown on the state side definitively, but I think planning with any increase at all is planning with money we won't have. If somewhere in this, I think we need to make an assumption there's going to be less state revenue next year, and therefore, rather than adopting a budget that includes that increase in state revenue, we need to at least have some plan for how we're going to backfill that difference.
Thank you.
Any other general questions?
Chair Vlodman, this is Steve. I just wanted to let you and the committee know that Commissioner Bozovich is on the phone.
Commissioner Bernie.
Sorry, Commissioner Bernie, not Commissioner Bozovich. You can see Commissioner Bozovich. Commissioner Bernie is on the phone here, so he is also on.
Great. Commissioner Bernie, did you have any questions to offer?
At this time, but thank you so much.
You bet. Any other questions? Okay, we're going to move forward and we'll adjourn the meeting, and we will see everybody on Thursday. Thank you very much.
Thank you.